Hey there, YouTubers. This is there's another School of Tomorrow episode where we're doing Americana. If you've been following this channel, I started with a lot of focus on a specific geometric logic, you could say a framework. But I've been eager to add place-based education, and the threads have been multiplying lately to where we've been looking at Orson Welles, who was already in the curriculum because the curriculum contains something I call Martian math. If you remember back to the Silicon Forest thread, let's do it. Digital math, does it take me right there? My browser has a memory. Good thing, because it saves me time. So this is Wiki Educator, not Wikipedia. I believe it's hosted somewhere like in New Zealand or somewhere. And I've been on this for free for a long time. It has some interesting content, including my original draft for the Wikipedia page on synergetics, the Bucky Fuller synergetics. Right? There's two synergetics books came out not that far apart, and there's a disambiguation to go to the Bucky synergetics, and I did a first draft of that article, and it's here archived. It's too sparse, and I agree it needed to be fleshed out and stuff by people. So Martian math, supermarket math, Neolithic math, casino math. These are four maths. Now casino math is especially relevant around here, given Indian gaming, given casino economies. Stillaguamish I've talked about. That's a casino I've toured, visited. I've never stayed there. It's just, I had a friend who worked there, and it's very interesting to learn some about the inside of a casino, the workings thereof. But I'm not the expert on that. I just wanted to say, yes, I fully embrace the anthropological implications of doing casino math in my neck of the woods, which is the Pacific Northwest, and where a lot of tribes who've been here forever, since long before the the big dam or the great white father corporation, what we call the United States or whatever. Long before that, we had tribes here, and like Grand Ronde, as they're called now, Tulalip. That's not really how I started planning my video, but actually this is a good place to be. The original Oregon, the original Pacific Northwest, and the people who were here. And lots of stories there, and I would go into masks and storytelling, stuff like my friend Craig Brown is into. Telling stories of the old stories, coyote stories included. And I've done some Lakota stuff, but that's farther east, Lakota tradition. But anyway, back to like Americana in another sense. Let's start at the end of this trail, where I'm looking at the Adam Curtis documentaries, of which there are several, and where could he branch into what I'm into, like more into the Bucky stuff, for example. And I give a good branch point. And he kind of does have a geodesic sphere fly by somewhere in the animations. But if you wanted to dive in deeper, go where you've already gone, into the Werner Erhard cult, we'll call it. Now, I use cult and subculture interchangeably. I'm deliberately trying to take the edge off of cult. I want cult to almost be as neutral as the word set when it comes to like Venn diagrams applied to social groupings. And, cult, family, I don't know, all these words that we use, group words, company, corporation, cults. Like, I want it to lose its charge in some sense. So here's an outline of the curriculum. Okay, so earlier under the heading of Orson Welles versus William Randolph Hearst, I brought up in that video, which is called Americana. Let's just take a brief look at what I'm talking about. This video here. We'll get the recursion going on here. So this is a whole chunk where I explain, what I mean by place-based education and how we can bridge to Bucky Fuller here too, and that there were two American Masters series entries of interest. There's the one on Orson Welles that I talk about at some length, and then the other one I write about here. I don't necessarily talk about it in the video much. But Thinking Out Loud, that was another video by the American Masters series, WGBH Boston, that was about Bucky. And it's a little bit kind of maudlin because it sets him up to be, oh, nice try, guy, but you kind of failed kind of thing. Not sure that's thought through because it's kind of a double standard if you actually look at his successes. By any measure, he was a success story. So I work backwards from that in my telling, regardless of what happens to humanity, right? I mean, that's not his problem. Not going to hang that on his head. So anyway, there's Americana, and what I want to go from there is, okay, here's Oliver Stone and his sense of history, which is pretty deep, right? He went to Vietnam and all that, and we're moving up through time, and I talked about Fletcher Prouty and his book JFK and how he fits into the Oliver Stone movie, right? The movie JFK and the book JFK overlap in the person of Man X, i.e., Colonel J. Fletcher Prouty. So we already talked about him. And now we're jumping to Laurel Canyon and the history of the rock star movement there. And the next step from there, this is stuff I've talked about before. Jim Morrison, Gulf of Tonkin incident. Glenn's actually read the Vietnamese version of what went on between their PT boats, so-called. They're not exactly PT boats, but that scale, right? Fired one shot, a warning shot. And then they were commanded to go in closer and be more provocative, right? The American ships. And nothing much happened there, but it was too late. The wheels had been set in motion to make this incident be the reason war had to start, as you know. So then I talk about, okay, so we're going through the Vietnam War. I already talked about links to Ken Kesey, and from there I would go to earlier in Greenwich Village, and Marie Romany, is that how you pronounce it? The woman who was sort of the go-between, who needs to know who helped Fuller and Noguchi find each other, right? So that was an earlier generation than like Jack Kerouac or whatever. But we're going to do Greenwich Village, and I'm always asking the question, is that when the word square developed its connotation? I've seen a John Bircher mourn how the word square got to mean something kind of derogatory, and he's bemoaning that, and I'm wondering if we should give Bucky credit for that. So going forward from the Hearst and Orson Welles conflict and Martian Math, Orson Welles connects to the CBS reading of the Martian attack story, right, online, on the radio. So from that matrix, we can jump 2 generations to Hearst's granddaughter, Patty Hearst, and the Symbionese Liberation Army. And I'll end this around there. I've got blog posts on that already where I'm reviewing the movie Neverland. Now, where is that? Is that in Control Room? So if you're new to my writings, what I'm covering here is stuff that's actually written down in other forms, right? But I think a lot of you in the School of Tomorrow, you're looking for roadmaps. You're here to like, where does Sam Hill fit in? Stuff like that. And if you've been listening to my stories about Sam Lanahan and what is C60, right? So you can start thinking back and doing reviews. What was the link between OSS and Buckminster Fuller? Who was Alan Potkin? These kind of questions, right? So I'm going back through my own writings here, touching on some of the Vietnam-related stuff. I also do talk about Guccifer 2 and stuff, but that's getting ahead of the story, right? What I'm looking for now is Patty Hearst. So let's just type in Hearst. I think that'll get us there, and this will be the end of my video. I'm trying to weave for you a basket in ephemeral sort of metaphysical space, a topology of interconnecting dots that you can use and also use as a model for your own dot connecting experiments, right? Where you're trying to tell the story of history and you're kind of using a spherical approach where your graph, by which I mean your network, closes back on itself in every direction. So I am sweeping in the Black Panthers here, right? I'm like, we're into that period of history with Patty Hearst being kidnapped and so forth. We're talking about a lot of characters. I'm scrolling through it on the screen here. If you're just listening, you're not seeing that, but that's okay. Okay, U.S. versus John Lennon, another documentary, very worth seeing, right? I'll click on that in another video perhaps. So here's Neverland's movie review. And we can connect, as Prouty does, we can connect to where does the CIA come from, and we can introduce it again into the story as they got involved marginally in this Patty Hearst business, or so goes the story with the U2. And the U2 is a connection again back to Prouty, right? And the whole story of the U2 being quote unquote shot down. And could Gary Powers really have survived if truly his U2 had actually taken a missile at that height, at that speed, in that plane? So that question gets raised, and then you get to the point where even Alan Dulles might not really know what happened there exactly. It was very embarrassing for the Eisenhower regime, or administration, as we say. We don't say junta, right? We don't say Politburo. We say, anyway, the administration at the time was very kind of full of itself in terms of being the superpower and all that. The peace conference coming up with Khrushchev was kind of sabotaged or waylaid by this whole U2 incident, which kind of put the two superpowers on a different footing all of a sudden, right? And so it goes, right, with the Prouty version. And so I'll leave you with how this all then branches into Toy Story, perhaps, if you want to go into geometry again, and the link there to C60, which, again, I'll end on. This morning, I'm breaking a cardinal rule. This is truly my swan song here, because we're dealing with a swan's neck. And I thought, if we're doing something curvilinear, what better time to break the rule of 180-degree connections? So we're back to C60. This has been a common feature in my blog, and we're going to use the magnifying glass. So what I'm talking about is this junction right here. It's turning a corner, right? This strut is coming out, and then instead of continuing at 180 degrees, which is the rule we always follow, I think in all the C60 sculptures I've shown you to date, where there's never an exception to that. We'll not go on, we'll just have a terminus, but we won't continue at any other angle than 180 degrees across the C60 logo. And that's an important principle if you're going to create what we call the classic C60 lattice, which is equivalently the CCP lattice in terms of relative positions of ball centers. Equivalently, the isotropic vector matrix in Bucky's terminology. So that's what we're usually up to, and everything else in the garden is that, but I've decided why not break that rule here and do a curvilinear. Here's another example. We're going around a corner here instead of going 180. And it's like, yeah, you can do that in this model. This is an implementation of the flextegrity concept where that's a possibility. I'm not saying all of them allow that either. So, hey, we're even getting bigger here. Wow, this is really good resolution, isn't it? So there's one of the turns, and let's go to the very top of this thing. It's supposed to be like a swan's neck. Like, here's like a little tail, and that's like kind of anchoring it, the white fluff of its front, and then sort of swoops around. The yellow is like maybe a bill. It's just the swoop, the curve, the S that's swanny-like, okay? All right, well, that was my morning, and I hope you're getting a feel for what I mean by Americana and place-based education. We'll talk to you soon.